Before it can adopt a positive voice, freedom requires an effort at disalienation. At the beginning of his life, a man is always clotted. He's drowning in contingency. The tragedy of the man is that he was once a child.
I felt like when reading this, it often felt like I, more than other sort of theory texts, I felt primed to like understand more about what was going on. And I too was trying to figure out like what questions do I have, because some of the psychoanalytic stuff I would like breeze through because I'm like, okay, this is just an example that he's like pointing out in like patients that he's experienced or notes that he sees from other um I guess psychologists or analysts reports. But all in all, it's like, yeah, like this, like that John Venu's thing, that felt very real. Like that felt like a critique of a my experience in college to some extent,
Mm-hmm.
right?
What was the
Like,
John Venus thing again? Was that the character who had the character in
yeah,
the novel that was kept believing that he was like having a letter correspondence with the white guy talking about how well, and then also with his like love, right? And he
mm-hmm.
had this insecure attachment style that was like, right, like she would tell him like, oh, I love you, we should be together, all that stuff, and then every time he'd find like a reason to not believe her.
Yeah, like like so like he's in correspondence with this white woman, and in the as she's saying like I love you, like try like why do you hurt me, he's like he keeps like pulling like pushing in to be like I love you too, but pulling back because he can't believe, like he can't fundamentally see that she is telling the truth, like he won't believe that she's telling the truth. And then there was this moment where he talks about how like he needed permission from like I think it was her brother or some other sort of like white man who was like, you have to believe her because her words, she's just telling you exactly how she feels. You are like, despite your skin, like as French as they come, you know what I mean, like everything you like, you aren't, you've demonstrated your worth, right, and needing that validation from a white person in order to like fully lean in.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying that that specific thing felt like a critique of my experience at Oxy, but I think that the the social political context within which a black person like being in, I don't know, sexual context or contact with a white woman, or a black man with a white woman, always brings up like this sort of social anxiety of like what is the significance of this, and what can actually be believed about the narrative that is going into this moment, right? Like um yeah, does that make sense? Like,
Mm-hmm.
I, to break it down, there's a moment where if you are, let's say, yeah, like okay, you're out and about, like I'm in, imagine me in middle school. I'm out and about, like it's about to be school dance time, and people are like picking dates or whatever, and I go to a predominantly white institution, and so like being invited to the dance by a white woman and being like, okay, like, yeah, I'll do this. That makes sense. But like having no, like for me, having completely cordoned off or removed the context within which like this could potentially be romantic, right? Like it is simply like, oh, like this person is taking me as a friend, and that is the like scenario that this must be, because there's no way that this person could have any deeper affections. And I think that, to like, I guess, round it out, right, sort of brings into context of like, I step into the ghost that I believe exists in the mind of this then girl, but like woman, right? Like the black entity that she sees is something that I must be constantly aware of. Like I remove myself and my own intentions and my own thoughts about this out of that situation completely. And I think something that's interesting with Jean Venus is that like he seems like the perfect example of the colonized like black person in this context. And it is because it's like that the thought, like I'm thinking of like Homi Baba, right, as well, like the Orientalist idea where it's like he's speaking the perfect French, he's like just demonstrating mastery over language and the literature, etc. Like he's at the peak of educational value, and yet still the anxiety that is brought into him, like that's sort of targeted and focused on his body, is imposed upon him, and he digests it. Like he's it's fundamental to his understanding. So he is still colonized, even though he is like breaking, like he's earned his freedom, so to speak. You know, even in the context of that white man validating him, it's like, oh, but his mind is still plagued. And so, yeah. Like I bring that up just to give like the context of like to lead into maybe the discussion of like the liberatory elements that he brings up, that Fanon brings on later. That's it.
Yeah,
like,
totally.
How does one free oneself from these binds, and can you? And
yes,
do you change in that? Like this person fundamentally changed because they are no longer existing as a individualized entity. Like their skin has a symbol that is therefore branded upon them, and they can't, and they themselves see that as their prison, right?
Okay. Okay, first of all, it's interesting that you should bring up like I think like intimacy, because this book is like definitely has a lot of like stuff that has to do with first like intimate relationships and relations. And like I guess psychoanalysis to begin with is a very intimate thing, because I mean it's all about your relationship with your analyst, and you know it's all about trying to get as deep into the individual as possible, to their like primal like formative interactions with other people. But like it also reminds me of so many other things we've talked about in Mutant Manifesto, which it's been a while, you know, but it's nice to be back, because it's like it reminds me of some of the early stuff. For example, the Black Hole, the Charles Burns, which is, you know, the mutants form in tandem with their romance sometimes. Like the mutations come about and then become their own kind of traumatic negotiations between lovers. Like once you realize that somebody has a tail, do you does that like stand in the way of your relationship to them, or does it almost become a fetish, which itself becomes a weird mask for your relationship, you know?
Yeah.
So like this question of like fetishization versus genuine love is something that is on one hand, and on the other hand there's another thing which you mentioned, which is like the existing in a full body cast that is a monstrous one. And so that like there's a Little Ugly Mane quote where he says like in one of his songs, he's like I was walking down the street, a white woman like crossed the street, you know, to not be on the same side of the street as me, and I like couldn't even blame her because like I understand, right? Like that like awareness of that monstrous appearance that you have to other people, to white people, white women, whatever, right? Um, Whether or not it's actually being perceived by the person is just always with you, and like that kind of like is on the other hand. So you're just kind of in between fetishization or like monstrousness, and those two things are both ambivalent, which is kind of the point about the homeopapas of mimicry and man. That's about the colonial context and about the ambivalence of colonialism when you have an individual who is of the colonized people but is able to be as French as they come despite their blackness or despite their whatever. The ambivalence of that kind of pointing out how kind of enchained the whole colonial regime is to begin with to certain expressions and inferiorities and or self dominion or whatever, which itself had me thinking of this idea of the. I feel like this book here, like Black Skin, White Masks, like there's a lot of ambivalence in it, or and it's kind of you have to read between the two. And I feel like me and Carson were kind of talking about this thing of sometimes being uncertain whether like the the things he's depicting were like, oh my, like you're saying some pretty wild things there, but like like do you actually believe that, or are you saying that's how things come across, or are you like making fun of it? It's very funny too. There is a lot of humor in this book, but it altogether feels very kind of bitter and almost like lament at times too, and like poetic and like futile, but also like an attempt, like a real attempt. I feel like all these things you can see directly how this feeds into this like Afro-pessimistic mantle that's been taken up more recently with people like Moten or Sadia or what's her name?
Sadia Hartman.
Hartman, right? Or what have you? Or who's the other Afro-pessimist guy who's coming over?
Frank. Frank B. Wilder.
Yeah.
Frank Wilderson the third.
Right.
Yeah.
Or a lot of rappers too, like Bus Driver. Like I'm thinking of like the Hellfire Club thing, and like like I think Bus Driver, who himself is a fraught figure when it comes to intimacy and stuff, like a lot of his work is definitely caught up in these like this double thing and stuff. I don't know. You can see how it connects to so many different things that have been discussed about the experience of blackness. But what I was going to say about the ambivalence, though, it's interesting in terms of things like magic, and in terms of things like soul, and the idea of like lending poetry to a white culture. So like essentially this idea that like black people become the like the heart or the soul or the poetry of French culture, American culture, wherever they exist in as like black people, as opposed to just like native inhabitants of whatever country. Like once they actually incorporate into a Western society, like there's this idea that then black people become the like something, right? The like culture, or they become the expression. They become the I mean, he also talks about like the bodiliness of blackness in a white culture, like. So, like, there's a lot of ambivalence, though, when it comes to all those categories: magic, poetry, heart, body, all those things. Like, there's a lot of power to be gleaned there, because, like, that's a really powerful thing to be working with. But it's also, like, this kind of, once again, this kind of, like, anxious and depressing moment of, like, being constantly mistaken, missed for a sort of sense of being magical, or like, oh, you must be so, whatever it is, whether it is like emotional, right? Oh, you're so in tune with your emotions, or you're so like rhythmic, you're so good at rhythm, right? Whatever it is, like, the heartbeat of the culture. I feel like there's an ambivalence there too, like just in general. And I feel like that, I don't know, or maybe ambivalence is even the wrong word.
like, are you saying like ambivalence to? Yeah. I see what you're saying.
Like,
Because at the one hand, accepting the stereotype and sort of like venerating it to some extent, but then also in the same sweep vilifying the conception that this is a universal quality of Black people or the
yes.
Black experience.
Yeah, like for example, right? Like it's like, okay, so it's good if you're in a culture that's bereft of feeling, but you are supposedly able to like feel things and express the feelings more profoundly, then like that's an advantage that you have, right? Something that you actually,
Right.
it's a good thing to have that, but it's also, yeah, like you said, like it's something that I think can be like a, yeah, it can, I mean, it's like a stereotype, right? And so like to exist within that means that like, of course, you know, you're gonna miss a lot of individuals variants and like stuff. um but also I feel like there's an ambivalence to the way that he even like kind of portrays and works through some of this stuff. No.
Yeah. Yeah. Because on the one hand, like even with when he's sort of riding around or in conversation with Sartre, there's a need to at once interact with the idea itself, the misconception or the stereotype itself, or the universalized perspective. But in order to break out of that and to break it into individual parts, or to give credence to I don't know, uniqueness or individuality, um, he has to lean in and then sort of like blow it up a little bit. Um, and I think anyway, I could bring it back to that physical example as well, because I think that talking about virility and or the potential threat of Black men, like there's that moment in I think it's around like page 148 or 147 where not, the Black man he writes like he is a penis, right? Like and then he also at the top of the page it says the Black man's prick is a sword or whatever, and like talking about this sort of like threat and also like universalized conception onto the of his virility. But then on 148 talking about this prostitute that's like constantly that's chasing intimacy with Black men because she had heard a story of how a woman slept with a Black man and went crazy, right? And then after, like, I think in the same situation, after she finally like has the opportunity to sleep with a Black man, because it was like just as regular as any other sex, she's like, I'm not having sex with anybody else. Like it's dumb. Like there's no point anymore. Like, and I think he adds that in there to like, because on the one hand, I think a lot of people would be like, is that like disparaging, to be like, oh, like Black men can't fuck or whatever. But at the same time, it's like this kind of like it's trying to use an example of like how insane it is, right? That people have these fixations and are so obsessed with the genitalia of like an individual that like their sort of, I don't know, gender becomes politicized. And that's something that not only one has to carry with them, but one also might want to shed in order to just be, to exist, right? Like later on, he talks about how like it's like someone even points out how when people talk about the sensuality or the inherent sensuality of Black men, that like it was ridiculous and so like absurd. It's like, why are you so fixated on like on the sensuality of this person and saying that it is crass and saying that it is bad? Like because if the tables were turned, if like if a woman says to a woman like, I hate how sexy she is or something, or I hate the sex appeal of something that she exudes, it loses its sort of context because it becomes a sort the jealousy is revealed. And the sorry, I'm losing myself a little bit because I'm trying to bring in all of these examples, so let me rein myself in. The point is, I think by bringing up the absurdity within the perceiver, the white perceiver, and I think the French perceiver of the black person in this context, he's able to like try to like dispel all the rumors and get to the heart of like it's always both and, right? Like it's always, yes, this happened to this, like let's pretend that the story that the prostitute or the sex worker sold was true, and that also does not universally apply to every black person, right? Like it would be insane for someone to say, or and he talks about this later as well, like that because of this man's like Italian heritage, and he's talking about, you know, them being destroyed by Montgomery in World War II. There's like an Italian force that was completely pummeled by this. I think it's like Egypt English British force. And the guy in the story, he turns to his friend and he says, hey, like you're getting fucked up out there. Like, you know, they're destroying your people. And he's embarrassed because, you know, the French think of the Italians as cowards, etc. And it's sort of like this mark of shame for this person. But this person is also a black person. Like he's Martinican and all of his friends are Martinican. He frames it as he sees himself as Martinican, but also through ancestry, he is also Italian. So his body is constantly being flipped depending on the political context. And maybe the ambivalence that Fanon tries to bring up in this moment is that both things can be true and both things can be false. And the more time we spend or waste fixating on these sort of like generalizing concepts, the less personhood you are offering yourself and black people. But I think he most specifically is talking about like black people. But I think there's also a little bit of tongue in cheek where it's like you are being dumb white entity that is racist because you are limiting your scope and your understanding of like, you know, the world or people in general. Sorry to ramble on that one.
Oh yeah.
No, I think there might be some things from the beginning, from the intro, that might be helpful, that really framed a lot of it. Like, but there were definitely like some statements that I feel like maybe would rub people the wrong way at first, of like, oh, like there is only one destiny for the black man, and that is to be white. And that there's like, you know, he's just pretty much laying bare there's that there is this massive social, psycho, existential process that's been put into motion, that it's like how to get out of that. I think there was I believe the fact of the juxtaposition of the white and black races has created a massive psychoexistential complex. I hope by analyzing it to destroy it. And I feel like maybe just to frame some general things, is kind of like the question is how is it possible to extricate ourselves from this, or is it possible to extricate ourselves from, I guess maybe a different tension we could tease out is like race and racism, of like maybe that race once already put into motion, like it seems like there are people that believe that that's a forever thing, or maybe not forever, but like it's not going to be a easy thing or whatever. And like then there's the question of difference at all, of like, you know, people having different skin tones and different like features, whether that like constitutes race at all. But I think maybe what we should state is that, like what we've already been talking about, is that the fantasy, like racist fantasies, are what constitute and structure race and actual like reality. And that's where like a person who has been racialized is put in this situation where they are always in like multiple of like, you know, your own subjective self, but then also always this object of like racist fantasies. And then the constant interplay of those. And I think that like maybe a goal, it seems like, of the book was to try how to like study this and blow this apart enough to the point where there's a way to think out of it, really. I don't know if it, yeah, I feel like it was helpful for me to just go back to some things from the beginning just to ground ourselves and ground the conversation in some of that.
Yeah, I had a question actually for y'all, because when I got to the end, I couldn't get the idea of like the Wetiko out of my mind, but like that racism is a disease of the mind is kind of somewhat a bit what he's framing here. And maybe like what does it look like to break that apart, given the structures that we inherit, right, with racism, right? And because I don't know if he actually sort of describes it beyond like diagnosing the problem.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that's only kind of hinted at the end, and it's like the whole thing seems like it's kind of a it's like a, I mean, the idea, I don't know, maybe you can also kind of ground this a little bit in time. Like, okay, so this book came out in 1952. Frantz Fanon is like he was a revolutionary Algerian, I think he was like a medic, but he became incorporated into French society. So this is he writes in a colonial context, so it's no mistake that these things are related to like Homi Bhabha and stuff, but this is also a context in which like black people in America are like a thing, right? So like there are different kinds of blackness that he talks about, like the different contexts of blackness, but so like just, you know, but the specifically he's doing like he's in France and talking about like different colonial and anti-colonial movements that are happening in France. So like so like, you know, and this is in the 50s. So I think, but it's just so striking how fundamental this text seems in retrospect. Like you kind of like do this archaeology of all these different phrases and stuff that we have in popular culture, like once you go black you never go back or whatever, right? Or like all these different like concepts are that you see through popular culture, different movies and music and stuff, like Get Out or whatever, right? I think they're so underpinned here. But so like, how do you get out of it, you know? How do you get out of it? Like the Wetiko of it all, it seems like he's trying to kind of do this post-structuralist thing, which is also like of the time, which is like if you can deconstruct something, that doesn't mean like, that means you understand it enough that you can then like take its pieces apart so that it loses its like hold over you, you know? So, and that's kind of the whole idea of psychoanalysis too, is that if you can understand all the different constituent parts of your psyche, then you can then you know, you can't just blow your psyche up, but like, if you understand it well enough, then hopefully you can understand why you have irrational behaviors or impulses that manifest without you understanding them. So like, if you do understand them, then you can be aware of them, and that can potentially lead to like, I don't really know much about psychoanalysis, to be honest, but like, I guess the idea is that can lead to some kind of, you know, you're kind of trying to like force them out by kind of understanding them and like sitting with them enough. And so I feel like a lot of what this text is like wrestling with the different like phantasms and ghosts and geists that are and shadows, right? Like that are ricocheting around you know, metropolitan European life in the context of being a person of color, like a person of color. I think it's worth mentioning this idea of like double consciousness, just to get like us to have another like just thing to take away that we can use throughout the discussion. And for listeners, like double consciousness, there's this scene with him on the train. I feel like that would be good to go over at some point, just to kind of like have it to an important kind of fundamental concept.
Yeah, that double consciousness, being at once aware of who you are as an individual, and then also aware of society's or the social perception of who you are, and knowing when you are transformed into one or the other, having a base form. Like like on page 90, he talks about how like in the normal context where a black person or black people, I'll just read it. In the 20th century, the black man on his home territory is oblivious of the moment when his inferiority is determined by the other, right? So ostensibly able to hang out and live as a entity or as a human being. But then once the other is encountered, he is then othered and has to bear the weight of understanding his othering while being localized in himself. I don't know. I don't remember the moment on the train though, Jackie. So
well, yeah, I mean,
I was just giving context for double consciousness.
Yeah, I will say another thing that's interesting about this text is that like I really appreciate how it does go between like critical theory, cultural analysis, textual analysis, and also personal anecdotes, and sometimes very poetic personal musings. I think those things are really like compelling, and I see that also like those things also kind of carry on through this tradition of like Afropessimism, if you, for lack of a better term, like is a lot of it meditates about one's own experiences too. But anyway, like yeah, one of those was like he's on a train, and basically he's like, oh my god, I'm so glad to have this boxcar to myself. I can relax on my way to this thing. I don't have to worry about blah blah blah. And then like a white woman and her daughter come on to the same boxcar, and he's like, and he goes through this process of like feeling this like, you know, tension of like, oh man, now I've got to like be here and like kind of perform civility for these people. So that's already like just this idea of what code switching or whatever, or like not even code switching, just like adjusting the way that you hold yourself for the sake of those around you. But then he's thinking to himself, like, should I even be doing that? Like, shouldn't I be able to live my own autonomous life without having to do that? Right? But then sure enough, like, not only does that happen, and then he's already in this kind of thing where he's between, can I just live autonomously, or do I have to be in relation to this whiteness, right? White anxieties that I know are here now. But then it's like, in addition to that, then at some point, the white girl is kind of said something like look, it's a black person. I think she says Negro or something.
Yeah, look, a Negro.
So that introduces yet another round of these like, and basically Fanon is like narrating that for us. He's narrating the different meta narratives he has, and like this echoing of identities that and of rhetorics that happen within his own, you know, mind. Like for example, then, you know, for that, of course, he's like, should I be laughing? Should I be mad? If I'm being angry, then she will say, look, it's like, oh, the Negro's being angry, like, you know, and that's like more of a dangerous situation or whatever. But that, so then like, should you laugh and just be kind of the good natured? And then so like there's all these different sort of manifestations that are kind of cycled between, and you as like a thinking person are unable to like grasp onto sort of this kind of stable baseline of identity that consensus reality, consensus like European civilization is supposedly fixated on, the figure of the human as like a locatable individual, right? That's unsettled by these moments in which there are multiple shells, of a person that you have to interact with. You have to interact with your own phantasmal reflections. So what does that do to like one's ability to exist like autonomously if you have all these things echoing around?
But at the end of that story, doesn't he? Is this the part where he says like, and he says "fuck you" to the woman?
Yeah, maybe
at the end of the day.
I think that might. I don't remember what the actual thing that he does is, but yeah, maybe he does. Yeah, I think he ends up being like, no, like I have a right to blah blah blah. He actually said, he voices some of this stuff.
Right? Yeah, because at least on page 94, like there's a quote that's like, look how handsome that Negro is, and then she says, the handsome Negro says, fuck you, madame, and then her face colored with shame. At last I was freed from the rumination. I realized two things at once. I had identified the enemy and created a scandal. Overjoyed, we could now have some fun. And like, I think what's happening there as well is like part of the liberatory process is to like take some of the shackles off, right, that confine you to like, do I lean into one image or the other, and then recognize that it is just disrespect. So you're not owed my civility because you are doing something uncivil, and therefore I react with like I act, like, to use some of the language that he illustrates in the end, like he acts because it is a moment that can be put in a more neutralized context. And while we know like the ruminations and all of the things that he was going through, and like we have an awareness of the social context within which he is sort of figuring out what he's going to say or how he should or would react, we are also brought into a moment where he's saying that it is necessary to act as if those things aren't the basis from which you are acting, if that makes sense, right? You can just point out the problem and then give it back to the perpetrator, because what is happening is a transgression. I don't know, though, like when we bring it into the context, like, okay, this woman is ashamed, like she was trying to do something good by like illustrating to her daughter that like Negroes are people too, or something like that. I think also as well, like if we bring it into an American context, right, that there are people who sort of do, race baiting, like trying to like say inflammatory things based on race, and like try to be unapologetic about it, think Confederate flags, etc. And the reaction to that vitriol and anger almost like reifies the structures that are social, right? Like just saying like, this is insulting. Bringing up logic doesn't help, right? So what do we do then is kind of the question that I have, right? Like if you are already transformed, and even if you say like, fuck you, where do you go from there? Like you had your fun, you acted as an individual, and like you acted as an individual within that context, and you're bringing people along into the thing to try to stir the pot to some extent. But I don't see that always as productive, right? Like in this moment, in the French context, it was productive only in as much as he knew that this woman would feel ashamed. But outside of that, right, or should things escalate, where do you go? Because it just becomes an Ouroboros of the racial context in my mind.
Yeah, at the very end, like, he does kind of, like, I think that this, like I said, I think a lot of the text is like trying to wrestle with like the those cycles, the like never-ending cycles. There's parts that like are, for example, like there's also part that where he's saying like the indifference is actually what kind of sucks sometimes too. It's like not even just that you want to be left alone by white people. Again, this is a metropolitan, like, black person in European or Western, like American or European white culture. It's like he also makes this like provocative claim that like black people want to be stereotyped or like put down by white people so that they can prove them wrong, right? So that you can have that feeling of having something to like fight against and something to like expectations to overcome. But then you also don't want to be like, there's so many different things there that are kind of like never ending, kind of like imbalances and power dynamics. I was kind of curious about that moment though.
Yeah, I maybe to bring in Moten might be helpful in this context as well, because I think like in a sort of maybe a more modern conception of what's going on here is, while all of these things happen and like some black people experience this and others that, being like, hey, I want to prove this white person wrong by being the most erudite or whatever person in the room, but then the other is like, I'm going to act aggressively because that is my right to as a human in front of the situation. I think it is creating this this position where you are giving yourself the permission to transform yourself, knowing that you have been transformed, if that makes sense. Like the idea is so that you you are acting autonomously in this sort of wackadoo situation, right? Like you have choice, and the idea that you are sort of prefixed in a concept that has sort of alternate forms, right? Like the Le Bon Banana, the like cereal mascot of the smiling black person, sort of this like caricaturized black person that sort of is sort of a mark of like a peace gesture, like be smiling, be pleasant, and be like it and there's nothing to fear of the black person because they are sort of childlike or in subservient positions. Your knowledge of what's going on gives you the ability to choose the response that you want, and then also like you have to do the work of like not being limited by your response and hooking it onto that historical context, right? Like I think, or maybe there is a sense where he's saying that like you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. Make a choice, because at the end of the day, you being fixated on this is going to continue to wrap you up in the racialized context. Like you continue the efforts of your colonized self by worrying about like what happens on the after you act, or like what happens because you acted in a human way, though you would consider it in a black way, and therefore in the black way it is somehow connected to the racial the perception of everyone of your race.
I have like a anecdote that I feel like brings up a question that I would ask. It was one time, and I thought still think about this sometimes, but I was having a conversation with somebody, like a pretty serious conversation, and they said to me like that you should always be aware when you're talking to somebody, like you should always be aware of them racially. Like if you are talking to somebody that is a person of color, you should always be aware of that. And I'm curious what you think of that. What either of you think of that, and also maybe like, because these are like real life. Not to say that what he's talking about like are obviously real life scenarios, but like maybe to put it in a context of like, okay, you're trying to not be racist. You're trying to get away from whatever you want to call it, whiteness or racist ideology. And you say or do something like, you should always be aware of some, like, or you could change the context, I think, and it wouldn't really be that much, you should always be aware that the person that you're talking to is a woman, or you should always be aware. And yeah, what do you think of that?
Are you asking me specifically?
Either of you, or like what, or what you think, or what you think Fanon would also say to this, because I
mean, so okay, to add to kind of like I'm kind of curious about what Fanon's take on this is as well, but like to kind of maybe there's like this quote that I was interested in, and then we can also like talk about our own personal takes on it, right? But like,
yeah,
because it's kind of like this whole like, oh, should we be colorblind? So obviously not, right? But so like, what's the role of like how important is identity for like someone's how important is background and like identity labels to somebody's personhood? But it's like that is kind of the question that's articulated throughout this book too, is like there's this distance between like the white man and the black person. Like there's some distance between like the white man's version of humanity and like the black person as far as it's understood in European context. Like, and so like I guess one of the questions that I would have originally is like, okay, so then are you supposed to, and I think that's echoed by Fanon and like a lot of people, the characters that he talks about in different texts, is like, are you supposed to strive to attain that thing that is like by design kind of like leaving you out of it? Or are you supposed to, like, what are you supposed to do in that context? Are you supposed to just continually remain the outsider, the monster, the whatever, the like entertainer, the doll, whatever it is? Or what are you supposed to do, right? But so like at the end he says, quote, the Negro is not, period, any more than the white man. Both must turn their backs on the inhuman voices which were those of their respective ancestors in order that authentic communication be possible. Before it can adopt a positive voice, freedom requires an effort at disalienation. At the beginning of his life, a man is always clotted. He's drowning in contingency. The tragedy of the man is that he was once a child. Unquote. So like, and he goes on. He gets like really poetic at the end there. It's like the last couple of sentences, but like so. What does it mean that he says, like, you have to, both must turn their backs on the inhuman voices which were those of their respective ancestors in order for authentic communication to be possible? Like, what does that mean? And like, also this idea that like the reality is that like everyone is drowned in contingency. It is true that like everybody lives in such overdetermined circumstances that are so like thick with different connections to different things. So like in a way it's true that like everyone is already like brought into this nexus of like infinite kind of complexity and like back and forth kind of stuff. So it almost requires the kind of like, yeah, like it requires a thinking through the complexity in order to arrive back at sort of like a primal experience of just like spontaneity or something, almost, maybe, or like one's true will or something. But you have to like go through all the different contingencies that shape it in order to like understand how you really feel or something, in order for there to actually be like a real person that you're talking to. So like it seems like he's once again ambivalent, but it seems like you need to let go of the like phantasmal voices of the people that you are representing or whatever in some sense. So you have to let go of like this phantasmal past, but also reckon with the actual contingencies that you have with other things, with like material relations, in order for, but then the goal is to get to like a point of like genuine exchange between two individuals. So like you need to be, I guess, and then to, I mean, like my personal thing is that like, I guess like the idea is that you understand it enough that you can then be spontaneous and individual, as opposed to a representative of a overdetermined identity category. So like, you know, I mean, you know, there's like, you know, the I understand like as a male-bodied person or as like a white person, like if I'm in an elevator with a and I'm like wearing this like camo like top and I have like my John Deere hat on and I'm in like in an elevator with like a I don't know, like a Muslim woman or a woman to begin with, like a small woman or whatever, or a black person, I do go through like a whole circuit of like, okay, how am I supposed to be acting right now? Like, am I supposed to like be like, hey, how's it going? You know, or is that like gonna be, does that put them off? Or am I supposed to like ignore them? Or am I supposed to like, you know, like there's that kind of tension that can occupy you. And I think it does oftentimes for like liberal, like college going people. And then like at some point, I don't know, but the goal is, I feel like for me, is to like see the person as an individual, but like you can't do that automatically. You have to like go through the process of deconstructing things, which means understanding and like sitting and implicating yourself with them.
Yeah, like on top of that, because I think in that situation, you like your joke, I think, is the answer, though. I think Fanon would say that that's the answer because you understand what is happening there in like the social and political context. But if you just reach out and say, hey, how's it going? Or like treat them with politeness, just, you know, acknowledging them as a person, as you were saying, Carson, again, with your question, like you are putting them, you're breaking down the sort of internalized structures by simply just saying, we're in the elevator together. You know what I mean? And you can take it at that moment rather than allow the assumptions and social structures prevent you from saying anything. Or, you know, I mean, granted, if you put on like, if you accidentally slip into like accents, right? Like if you know, that's like a bad way to make friends, but like still,
I do that.
You know,
I'm so bad with that.
Listen, I realize that I do that sometimes too. Like it's like
mirroring some mimicry thing that, yeah.
It's an attempt to be. It causes you anguish, you say?
Yeah.
Sorry,
keep going.
No. I want to talk about that a little bit more. But I think.
Go for it.
No, you go ahead.
No, I think well, Jackie's talking about like this kind of like intense, you know, like, you know, this process of how to act, of how to be, what are the social like I don't know. What are the social boundaries, or what are the normal things to say? This is all very like, a very like, what I'm trying to do is connect it with this whole thing that I feel like Fanon is trying to do of like, um that like, okay, maybe I have another question actually, is maybe like, I I'll just answer what I think first. But I kind of think that he's just basically saying race is not real. Like, it's, I don't know if he's like ambivalent a lot of the time, but I think he uses the word like coincidental a lot. That it's basically like, we could look at someone like this character Jean Veloz that he was talking about is like a neurotic, but like he is also coincidentally black. And is his neurosis at all attributable to his blackness, basically? Um, and that was like a question that I was trying to figure out what Fanon's actual like argument was there. And I keep coming up against, and it's funny he brought up like the elevator, like that, um, that you are individuals, and sure, there's like, a lot of identity things that are like always at play, but also you're two people in an elevator, and that's like undeniable. And it is like brings people to this level of universality that kind of erodes that intense scrutiny. I think that that's, I mean, maybe we're all saying the same thing. I'm just going to read a quote that he had that was in the beginning, but like, Fanon writes, quote, "I shall attempt a complete lysis of this morbid body. I believe that the individual should tend to take on the universality inherent in the human condition." And then he goes on to talk about that race, or in this context, blackness, is an epidermalized inferiority that is the result of a process of primarily economic exploitation. And it's interesting to think about stuff of just like talking about very, like the weather, or I'm saying this as like somebody who also, struggles with some like social weird things, or a lot of us like are all like dealing with a lot of like intense social angst and anxiety and regret and embarrassment about all the things that I've said, and I should have done this better, and how to like get beyond a lot of this. And it is interesting to think about taking on like universal things as opposed to more particular hyper specific things. That this leads me back maybe to the question of like, it is kind of insane to always be thinking about, oh, this person's black, oh god, like I don't know, like this weird, I feel like to always be cognizant or aware of race is obviously a product of racism, but it is also like something to be exceeded. It's something to be gotten beyond, to kind of be blown apart into something that's very normal. You know what I mean? Like it's something that it's almost like blown into like, yeah, what you're both saying, like just coming together as two individual people. But of course runs up against this, can we escape these overdetermined categories? Can you escape, like, for example, an epidermalized inferiority complex that's not like an individual fault, of course, but a culmination of centuries long structures that I don't know, like but it is funny to think about something like just like a very normal everyday conversations about stuff like, oh, we're in an elevator or the weather or something. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I there are two things that you mentioned here that I think tie into what Fanon is saying now and what I think Moten talks about later. And I think in terms of like, to one thing I wanted to say to answer your question on like how do I feel about like you should always be aware of someone's race, like in the elevator or what have you. I think Fanon might say you are subconsciously always aware of their race,
Yeah, you're
and
always, yeah.
like bringing it to the forefront of your mind in the, like, you know, is like a choice that you can make. But what should be happening more presently is actually like an attempt to unify in those discrete moments. So like trying to, you know, befriend, be friendly, like broaden your community so that should you see this person in the elevator again, you have familiarity, and it sort of breaks down the maybe individualistic parts of society that get sort of exacerbated by race, I guess. And then um, I think that coincidence of being black versus the actual, like, is his blackness the thing, the cause of that? Like, I think him being neurotic is the basis, and then him being black is maybe how he, like, how that neurosis is like performed, but not going into most of that. I'm talking about Jean Vanu.
Nice,
Sorry.
yeah. No,
But,
I follow it.
but in that same moment, like, and going back to the, you know, the problem, right? Like, oh, like, forget, like, she actually loves you, right? If you're talking about John Venu's, but in the elevator moment, or in the context of how should we move, understanding the negative histories that are attached to our race and our Western context, I think it is, as Moten might say, I this is what I think he would say, is that it's the performance of that freedom and the performance of being liberated from that thing that matters the most. Because if you continue to be mired by it and continue to be sort of like contained within the like structures that, you know, people fought against, and therefore create this like enmity between you, like you and I, for example, like we would be mutually opposed because you're white and I'm black. But the reality is we are friends, and we have a beautiful friendship relationship outside of that race. And we are doing, you know, working together to like dissolve some of those like seemingly like concretized elements of society that would say that we shouldn't be interacting with each other as we do. But the more we perform this thing, and the more we like actually sort of peel away the masks that we are all called to wear, to bring in the title, I guess, is the more easily it will be to even discuss topics like this. Because he in the last chapter, sorry to stay there, he talks about how like even like if the a black man talks about how this is where he used to boil or cook the white child's ancestors, that's actually a step in the right direction. Give me 1 second, I'll find it.
Yeah, this was like a schoolboy's like a white schoolboy's caption on a photograph of like a cauldron or something.
Right. And so, and yeah, I can't find it quite yet, but he's saying that like by seeing this image, right, and understanding that the black person that he is standing next to is not the ancestral black person that would be performing cannibalism, right, is a way of breaking down the black person's connection to, I guess, his checkered past, and the white person's connection to his checkered past, like colonial, etc. And so in the moment, we have the luxury of having been born in a moment post some of the bloodier fights and post some of those like tarnished elements. And I think people now, as they sort of combat these cultural structures, might say that that's not the way to do, and you have to, like, even like the word like person of color being broken down into BIPOC, Black, Indigenous person of color, or whatever, right? Like, or people of color, like trying to identify these experiences and making them unique. They're two sides of the same coin, but one is not saying, but I hope, or I choose to believe that Fanon is not saying, forget the past, move as if you're in the present, because the past kind of haunts the present. But he's saying that, like, in your awareness of the past, you are able to be thankful and grateful for the present, and, you know, move positively with the tools at your current disposal.
Yeah, I mean, there's like a materialism to the way that like your psyche affects you, you know? So like, it's a real like thing that you can't really, like, there's a materiality to it, you know? I mean, he brings in like Marx, Freud, Lacan, Hegel, Sartre. So like, you know, he's talking about the psyche and about like material relations and stuff, you know? So like, I think that's relevant to this discussion of like, you can't just will something to not exist anymore, you know? So like, you can't just be like the dynamic exists whether you want it to or not. The identity, the shell that you have, like, exists whether you want it to or not. But it's like, that's why like deconstruction is important, because like understanding it and communicating to the other person, kind of like the mountain example of like, you gotta signal that you know that there's some sort of debt. It doesn't mean that you pay it, you know, but like you have to signal that you're aware of it, and somehow, and then like I like also the Moten's like idea of like ritualizing something, even if it's just for show, because that can mean that like, okay, once I get these signals, then I feel comfortable to progress into an authentic experience. Whereas if I do not receive those signals, then I'm just going to continue on my scheduled programming, because like, why would I take a risk? Why would I take a risk in an unsafe situation, right? So like your psychological baggage has effects. And like, so like, I think that's why it's important to understand someone's racial background, because it's like your impact on the person would disable different conversations from happening, or different their own, you know, but there's like ways to diffuse that if you like know which like if you can acknowledge it in some way. And that usually doesn't mean like saying like, listen, I know I'm white, I do not mind that you're on the elevator, I do not mind at all, it's totally fine, just so you know. Don't be like, you can't say that, doesn't work either. But like, you know, there is like a way to do that somehow, maybe, without saying.
Yeah. But is the way not
right
simply okay? Go ahead.
No, I guess, yeah. Well, I mean, in the way, I guess, is just to be an authentic person, but also to like, I don't know, whatever.
Well,
I don't really know.
But like, well, because the way I think about it, right, is that in the event where you are aware of the social structure or the power dynamics, by making an effort to diffuse attention in that moment is part of the battle. Like, I was at a dinner party like 2 weeks ago, I think, whenever I was having my fucking stomach Montezuma's revenge moment, and I hurt my back. There was a moment where we were talking about how at night, if you are a fast walker or you are behind a woman, and like to try to limit the amount of fear that might be happening as like a male, like we were men in this situation, like you would just like make like say something or say, hey, like, excuse me, like I'm just gonna walk by you or something, so that it's like make yourself known, so it doesn't feel, or that fear isn't fueled and that anxiety isn't sort of continued. Or, you know, all I'm saying is that if you know that you have power in the situation, part of using that power for good is to break down the like potential danger in that situation. So if someone might feel threatened by you being in the elevator, greeting them and like creating pleasant conversation, it might not always go well, but you at least took the first step to say like, hey, I recognize you as a human. You're in this elevator. We're in this elevator together. We don't have to pretend that this isn't a little weird, if that makes sense, right? Because like the way that I think about it outside of the race context is when people ask me why I wave and say hi to everyone, even if I don't know them, I think it is just a polite gesture to acknowledge somebody as they're walking by. You know what I mean? Just, you know, because they're there, right? And I think that dissolves the tension between like living around other people, or assuming that you might be interrupting something by being, you know, by making yourself known. I think it's like, I don't know. I think that there's something powerful in creating new social norms that, or at least I think in the Northeast, in the South, I think they do greet pretty much everybody, but it's like establishing social norms that are more inclusive and maybe dissolve potential tension, or even like acknowledge or bring them out, right? Like if there's a hater out there who's like, shut the fuck up, don't talk to me, then hey, they didn't want you to talk to them, but it still breaks the barrier of like, you know, everybody to themselves, keep in your circle, stay in your box, etc.
I mean, it is interesting though that, I mean, I don't know. I think I mean, you know, the terms of the particular norms can be, I think, are actually pretty interesting to talk about. I mean, like, because a lot of these things, I mean, does this not, I mean, the problem is that you're always one step away from slipping back into the whole dialectic, because like there are, for example, I don't know, like, and I think that it's almost a testament to the changing circumstances, or like different circumstances that we live in now, that in some ways, but like this text almost feels like a 90s text more so than contemporary, right? Even, you know, I think even 90s compared to now would have a different context, but like what I'm saying is that like you can always slip back into it, because it's like, okay, like what if you're in a Southern context and you believe that like you know, and you're taught that like you should always say like, yes ma'am, no ma'am, here's the door, like all these things, like, but like those things are also connected to a colonial or you know, like a unsavory past, and they are kind of rituals of subservience in some way, even though they can also be liberated from those contexts, you know. But like, so, you know, in a similar way, like you could think about every like trying to be cheerful and nice and stuff as like, you know, that would fit back into the like the clownish, like too friendly, like, oh, I'm no problem, there's no problem with me, like I'm a totally safe person, stereotype that Fanon is also like afraid of embodying, and that he like identifies with a lot of the Black protagonists in the different texts that he analyzes, like. So like there's always the danger of like going back, because like you can always choose to like go back into it and be like, okay, yeah, now I'm being this type of thing, now I'm being that type of thing, I don't want to be this type of thing and that type of thing. So but I think, I don't know, so that's what's kind of tricky, is like, but I guess is like you can always have the choice to go back into it. It's almost like it is a neurotic thing. It's like, you know, there's so many things that you can be fixated on and anxious about, and that the more you're anxious about it, the more real it becomes in your life and debilitating it becomes. But like, I guess like some people are like more prone to fixating on them because of the lack of safety that they experience around those things. and other people just don't even have to worry about it, and therefore just are able to come across a lot more naturally, and other people work through it and come out the other side. But yeah, I don't know. I guess I'm just saying that like the Wetico thing, like you can always find a way to deconstruct these things, I think, by understanding them enough. But I think there's also always a danger of like you can also think your way back into this like tense dynamic pretty much in any context too, you know, because like it's true, like there are threads of like colonialism and slavery that pervade most of society, like. But then the other thing I was going to say about like even now compared to like the 90s or something is that like there's also this element of, it seems like there is just so much like diversity to like a metropolitan city like DC or like Minneapolis or New York or LA, that like being aware of someone's race is like basically impossible, because like you don't know, like there's so much, I mean sometimes it is, but like but like there's so much complexity to what that is, like there's so much and like there's so many contexts in which like being aware of what is proper in this racial exchange is actually like infinitely complex, or like a unique situation, like, you know, people are not one thing these days, you know what I mean? So it's like and like they're from all different sorts of origins and stuff, and that's kind of how Blackness has always been, but and race to begin with, but like I feel like there's this it's kind of an ongoing thing where it's like also being deconstructed just through the fact of continual novelty when it comes to like racial interactions and mixing and stuff, like cultural exchange and everything.
You bring up something very, very interesting, Jackie. Going back to Carson's question about like does it make sense to always be aware of someone's race when you're talking to them? Because I think the more internal question though is like, you have to ask yourself, what race do you think this person is, right? You know, and like I like that's, it's so interesting because I think about race and the way that I, you know, race, ethnicity, and the difference between the two is that you really can't actually, like, you can't determine your race necessarily. Like, you are raced by society, so that's like, you know, it's nothing that you can do about it. And still, when I am interacting, let's say I'm interacting in any particular space, right? Like, someone might be ethnically Latina or Latino or something like that, or Latine, I guess, but racially white in my mind. Like, I'm like, oh, if we weren't in like this salsa club and you weren't speaking Spanish, I would assume that you were white, and like I would be correct because they are being raced as white, I believe, in like their normal interactions, right? But having a specific ethnic background puts the conversation that we potentially could have in a completely different context. So maybe when I am sitting in my awareness of who I think this person is, I am also, if I sort of listen to Fanon, Moten, whoever, I am also using what they are interacting with me with to tear down any presupposed notions or understandings that I might have of that person, right? Like, the charge is to be aware of what you like might be coming into the conversation with, and then allow the other person to like dissolve that a little bit, perhaps, right? Like it's you're giving them the opportunity to connect with you and break down some of those barriers, rather than doing the like neoliberal thing of like, this is a white person and they belong in this category of person, and because they belong in this category of person, I must interact with them like this, and you know, whatever, just act with impunity because of assumptions that you're making about the person, rather than letting the human element take precedent.
So, do we think this is like a program for like? Do you think that this is a like? Do we think that this is a satisfactory like way out of the anxieties of like mutanthood to begin with? Is like, I mean, there is kind of no way out. There's, we kind of forgot to mention like the times in this text where the words mutant are actually mentioned, which are in the context of somebody leaving their home, colonized town, and then going to live in some metropolitan Western white culture, and then coming back and becoming mutant to their erstwhile, like fellow colonized people. So then you're like, you're mutating French culture and you're mutating Algerian culture or whatever, or you come back a mutant and then you go back to France and you're no longer at home there either. And this kind of feeling of like not being able to go back, you know, once you take the step into the threshold of like white culture, of European metropolitan existence, there's nothing you can, there's no refuge. You're you know, to put it, I think Moten brought up a quote or something too about like, you're always on the wrong side of the Atlantic. You know, this idea of like being irrevocably changed and like now that you're just a new thing. That is kind of like mutant core. Like they're, and like these incidents are alienating to the self and to like, you know, but so like but there's kind of this urge to kind of like, you know, what is it that he says at the very end? This urge to, okay, he says, my final prayer, oh my body, make of me always a man who questions. So like, yeah, I mean, is it just kind of to be centered in the experience that the body brings and constantly trying to understand in order to liberate, right? That's kind of the alchemical process of mutanthood to begin with. Is like, if you're questioning things, that means that things have the chance to change and the chance to be different from what they have been prescribed to be. But in order to do that, you have to understand what they've been prescribed to be, perhaps. Is that kind of the program that we're left with? Like, does that seem like a hopeful program for mutanthood? Does it seem relevant to the post-humanist questions and questions that we've brought up in other contexts? And I guess also, like, I was also going to ask, like, where does this leave y'all, I guess, like, in relation to this, like, kind of Afro-pessimist lineage that we're tracing just a little bit? Like, do we think that this is kind of a salvo for this kind of Afro-pessimism, or is this like the way out of it, quote unquote? Even though you're not getting out of it, is this like the solution? I don't know. Like, how do we feel? I guess my question is, how optimistic do we feel upon the concluding this text? And sort of like his like kind of fraught calls for moving forward in a real, like, a disalienated way.
I think personally that I guess if I were to try to engage with the mutant element of this, I think it is a means by which, yes, like, it acknowledges the ever-changing state of affairs, mind and body, and maybe the prayer that he has at the end is that he never like takes things for what they seem, because seeming is adding some anti or ahuman or inhuman elements to what he's being presented with. In the Afro-pessimist context, I don't believe, I think that what maybe Wilderson might say is that all of that is well and good, and we simply do not live in a post-racial society because even the term post-racial is farcical. And there will always be a context within which your racial strata is poised against the material things in the world excuse me, and therefore those minds are permanent and grow increasingly permanent by the day, especially in this modern context where, you know, the body is I was going to say prison, but the body is complicated by external factors that will either keep you safe or put you in eternal peril, which, and those same factors are the doom of the world, right? Like these are things that will cause the end to come about. And like maybe the last thing I'll add on that is, did you see that like little the clip of that interview with Peter Thiel where he was like, the interviewer says, hey, like human life, like preservation of human life is good, right? And then Peter Thiel like pauses and he's like, well, there's so much in that. And he's like, why are you hesitating? Like, isn't like the idea to perpetuate human life? And he's like, well, you know, and he waffles on it. That is an example, I think, that Fred Moten would point to say like, oh, like this and the end of the world because of anti-blackness that's so ingrained to the levels of anti-humanness, you know? But maybe Moten feels a little bit differently, that there's ways to weasel around in the shadows, you know?
Oh, I honestly don't know anything about Afropessimism. I thought that this was actually a lot more hopeful than what I anticipated. And like some of the things that that Fanon says almost are like pretty utopian. I mean, I feel hope when reading this, not like me necessarily, but he whether he felt this or not while writing it is writing a certain hope into this. Yeah, I mean, it's a real endorsement of psychoanalysis as a process in which I feel like what people would call now doing the work of that like if we are trying to beyond racism, then it is like a lot of internal work from white people about their own racist fantasies, or not just white people, but any sort of like racial hierarchy. And then there's also a lot of what this book was aimed at is like this internalized inferiority complex while black. So it's like this. But what's interesting is maybe that like psychoanalysis as a process, as this process of questioning, or as like a format, maybe that it's not like this provides like a solution or an end goal, but it provides a format through which to go through this process. Yeah, I mean, in terms of the human conversation, I feel like, yeah, I mean, he says a few different things about humanness in its relation to whiteness. We didn't really even get into this part at all, but kind of this like fetishistic, like when the white world or white society or white mind, whatever, becomes too mechanized and like not human, like too capital driven, too technology driven, too logical or whatever, that the saving grace is always that there's the humanity of the black soul, basically, like this. Yeah, and he gets a lot into the like analyzing rhythm and its relationship to that and poetry. But like, yeah, I'll read a quote that he writes, I made myself the poet of the world. The white man had found a poetry in which there was nothing poetic. The soul of the white man was corrupted, and I was told by a friend who was a teacher in the United States, the presence of the black man beside the white is in a way an insurance policy on humanness. When the whites feel that they have become too mechanized, they turn to the men of color and ask them for a little human sustenance. At least I have been yeah, I don't know. It's hard because I feel like some of the things that have been offered up to try and frame this in like a, like some of the things that have been offered up like a pan-Africanist, like I feel like we could. It's too much to say about it, but like a black arts, a black power, like that, like there is a feeling that all of that for Fanon is still like wrapped up in kind of the same inescapable thing, that you're still thinking in terms of race, and it's still, and it's, this is all weird for me to say because like what do a lot of this is not even for me, it's not directed for me, like it's not a process that I have to necessarily go through, but like
like the Harlem Renaissance, for example, like this is a black movement within America, and it's like like this is like a important thing for black people to recognize themselves, but it also exists within New York City, it exists within a colonized space, and then is siphoned off like the vampires in fucking whatchamacallit,
Sinners.
Like in Sinners, right? Like like they're always gonna be at the door, within minutes. So yeah. But like I feel like I think I mean, and Josh, like you should probably wrap this up with like your final kind of analysis here, but like I guess that's the idea, is that like I think he lays out these things like there's a constant thing. All the different ways that he can get brought back into this question, like who is the most human, who's inferior, who's superior, who's liberated, who's not liberated, and like those things are important. Like they need to be understood. They can't just go away magically. But then like once you understand them, then you can get to the goal, which is this moment, right? And for me, maybe there's a world for like a mutant humanism, right, where it can actually combines humanity with the idea of mutation. But so like maybe there is something there, but that means that like white people are liberated from their own vampirism as well, right? That means that like but and then conversely, like black people can play the role of a vampire just as well as anyone else. So like anyone can be a drone, but and like he's not saying it's an essentialist thing, but there's like a materiality to the way that it's been manifested, as far as like who gets to be the lifeblood and who gets to be the sucker of the blood or whatever. And those things can all exist mentally and materially in the psyche and in reality. But then if you but like his goal is to it seems like to get past that to this liberated moment, this like ever-present liberated moment that is kind of impossible, but you always have to strive for. The last thing I'll say, because I don't have anything else, is this quote that he wrote: "This book is a clinical study. Those who recognize themselves in it, I think, will have made a step forward. I seriously hope to persuade my brother, whether black or white, to tear off with all his strength the shameful livery put together by centuries of incomprehension." It still feels hopeful. I mean, it's kind of like, what is the program? It's still like the program is still a program of questioning, and it is also reminding me of some of the Moten stuff of like wonder. And I feel like an online thing that I see a lot now is all about like whimsy and like
like maybe that it's, it's not about the destination. It's like the whole process along the way. Yeah.
That maybe to like sort of put a little cap on some of the stuff. That's why I think, at least when I read this again, it feels a bit more like a diagnostic exercise more than anything. Like he's diagnosing the condition, and then in the like as he sort of moves towards a conclusion, offers up like it's like, okay, we're aware of these things. Like now to that together, we are aware of these things. We need to work for the solution, right? Like there is no medicine that we need to take for this, but it's actually something deeper about trying to connect each other, right? Like when you're talking about the universalizing pursuits of psychoanalysts, he's saying that like there's something within us that will allow us to like reconnect as humans that will like supersede some of these social political contexts that we find ourselves in through, race and race structures. And I think like with Moten and with Fanon together, like Moten bringing Fanon into like this more modern context, we are now called to like bring up, like find these potentials for interconnectedness where like on very, very basic levels, we are becoming increasingly disconnected from one another and essentialized and sort of reduced by the societies that we live in. I think the Afropessimism that I sort of glean from this diagnosis, I don't think is a call to stop trying, but potentially is a beacon of awareness to like the dangers that we see cresting over the horizon, right? Or an acknowledgement of the potential impossibility of this task. And so that is to say, I don't think that Afropessimism sort of fits neatly within the mutant context because it almost like prescribes a stasis to the end of the situation. And I think that engaging with it, and it, as like mutants engaging with the concept of Afropessimism, we are making an attempt to try to break out of the confines that are posed by that theory and the structures that might prevent us from pursuing the change that we know to be good and beneficial and expansive of the human conception that we embody through the description of the mutant. So, yeah. Thanks for reading this with me. It was really fun.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks. Good stuff. Good stuff.
In thought and in body, no one, not two, in sky and seed sown, would dream up shadows to love through and hold their calloused hands, shaping change in the nether pool from breath to breath, coming up again and again, seeking vistas of freedom. Embody a haunted perspective and study the chaos. The mutant spirit still lives among us. There should be no attempt to fixate man, since it is his destiny to be unleashed. Learn from the Learn from the labyrinths and breathing mountains. Oh, that one's so good. How do you look and where are you looking? No way, no.
I think it was.
This is all of us.
Okay, yeah.
This is all everybody.
All right.
This is the pool. Note when you're stuck. Put sugar on your tradition pills and record before flight. Your wax wings are warmer than you think. When you plummet and hit the mud, how does that feel to rot with glee? To decay with me? Like the process of radioactive decay and unstable atoms. Oh shit, maybe I should stop reading because it cuts off. Wow, this is fun to read. I haven't read it in a while.
Okay, degeneration yields a more sustainable future is the last sentence. Just got to finish since we're almost there.
Thanks for tacking it on. A nice GMO at the end, a GMO'd sentence.
Mm-hmm. grafts.
Grafted.
Okay.
It's nice.
Okay, I'm gonna stop recording. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, same
Okay.
here. Thank you.
Thanks.